What's up, everybody? Listen, I know how you're feeling. I don't know how you're feeling. Maybe you're feeling good. Maybe you're not feeling so good. This is a very emotional time of year for fantasy football players everywhere. It's either you're making your way to the championship, you might have a chance to make your way to the championship tonight. A lot of fantasy players tonight, with the Chargers and Colts, right? You got
Yeah.
Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Michael Williams, Justin Herbert, Michael Pittman, Zach Moss, or Deion Jackson. There's a lot of players left on the slate, and I'm sure you'll be depending on a bunch of them going into week 17, which is the fantasy championship week. This is our last week of podcast in terms of 5 days a week. Next week we'll be going to, I haven't actually decided yet.
Yeah.
Either 2 or 3
We
days
got
a week. I don't even know yet, to be honest with you. But we're not going to be putting on a full week of shows for week 18 because at the end of the day, there's going to be so much going on. Like, we're hoping that your fantasy championship is done.
yeah.
Either already done in week 16, which I know a lot of leagues just forgot to change their settings, and then week 17, which is the championship week for most fantasy football players.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a crazy week. We don't know exactly what the schedule is going to be moving forward, but I don't know if people realize it is a lot to go through and do an episode, every day like we do.
Yeah.
And then having the same content. It ends up like putting us through the ringer every single week doing the same thing over and
Yep.
over. Like, we're going to try and get some good content together for the rest of the offseason.
Exactly,
Obviously, week 18 isn't technically the offseason. I don't know. I've been in leagues where it goes to week 18. That was just like this past year, but
Right.
It's no fun when that happens. So we're assuming that you have it set up correctly, that you don't have to worry about a championship in week 18 because there's just so much going on as far as players sitting and all that stuff.
Now we will go over. So next week on Friday we will go over the situations, right? Because there's going to be some teams not playing their starters, right? There's going to be a bunch of teams sitting their guys because they got nothing to play for. It's going to be a very tricky week. We're going to get a lot wrong next week, straight up. But we'll do our best to kind of decipher, what's going on around the league, and make sure that you guys are in tune with the best plays going into week 18 in case you need it. Okay, so we will be there now. This is a very interesting weekend, man. A lot of overperformers, a lot of underperformers, a lot of studs not coming through. Interesting week. The weather was shitty. We kind of knew you knew that going in. Fabian Rodriguez here. Good morning, Faraz and Zach. Y'all got me in the finals with George Kittle scoring 30. No, it was George Kittle who got you in the finals, man. 2 touchdowns. Dude, Brock Purdy's loving him some George Kittle. So that's awesome, Fabian. Good for you, man. Glad you punched your ticket in. Sean over here, Moss or Jackson tonight. He needs a combined 20 points from Keenan Allen and one of these running backs in half PPR. Listen, like the whole week, we've been going Moss over Jackson. All the indications have been pointing to Moss being the starter in tonight's game and being the guy on early downs. As long as this game doesn't turn into a one with the Chargers just leading the whole way and kind of blowing them out a little bit, I think Moss is going to be involved. According to all the reports, seems like he's going to be the guy, especially in half-point PPR. You figure that Moss will get those goal line carries if they do end up getting there. So good matchup. Probably want to go with the guy who's going to get it done on early downs. So that's where I'm leaning, Sean. But yeah, man, let's get into it, dude. Like, we got a lot to talk about. From the we're gonna go over all the takeaways from week 16. And so that if you're making your way into week 17 championship weekend, you're fully prepared as to who to start and how these situations are looking. Let's start with Atlanta real quick. Tyler Allgeier, he took a big lead in the Falcons' backfield this week. 18 carries to Patterson's 8, but also 4 catches on 5 targets, 23 opportunities for Allgeier in this one. He also led with 59% of snaps to Patterson's 37%, and he led goal line snaps 3-1. He had a role on early downs. He had a role on passing downs. He had some 2-minute snaps, and now he has a great matchup against Arizona this upcoming week.
Yeah, I mean, he looked really good, and this is kind of going along the lines of what I kind of called this. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I'm saying, like Desmond Ridder, Tyler Allgeier, Drake London, kind of leading the youth movement for the Falcons. I think they're just going to see what they have at this point in the players that they drafted, this season, and that's kind of what we saw this week. Tyler Allgeier outpacing Cordero Patterson Obviously, Patterson's a bit older. We're wondering if he's run out of tread on the tires. But in this offense, it looks like Allgeier is going to be the guy the rest of the way, even though it's like only one realistically relevant fantasy week left this season. Avery Williams didn't have whole much impact. He only had 3 carries. He did have 2 targets. That kind of dropped Cordero Patterson's route participation in that a little bit. But it's nothing to worry about, for Tyler Allgeier. I like Tyler Allgeier the rest of the way. I think he could be a low-end RB2 next week with some upside, like you said, against Arizona.
Definitely. We talked about Drake London last week, right? Second good game now with Desmond Ridder. 27% target share. He caught 7 of 9 for 96 yards in this one. So now I'm feeling a lot more comfortable playing him next week as a wide receiver 3 against Arizona now, right? Like, it's a good matchup again. Tom Brady didn't think so, but last night. But it is a good matchup, for, I'm assuming that Drake London will be able to do his thing. But now we have a 2 out of 2 game sample size with Desmond Ridder. And Drake London has been averaging 10 targets and 7 catches over his last 2 games with Ridder.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were kind of hoping for. We know that Marcus Mariota wasn't looking his way a whole lot, and Drake London had become obsolete at that point. Guys like Demir Bird and Olamide Zaccheaus were getting targets over him. He had some quiet days with Marcus Mariota, but it looks like better days are ahead, not just this season, but even for next season. Say, should Desmond Ridder start, and be the guy next season, at least for the beginning of 2023. But what we saw from Drake London, like you said, the targets are definitely there, and he's now reliable. I'm not saying he's like an upside guy. This isn't someone I'm like super excited to put in my lineup, but somebody who previously had 0 value sitting on your bench, now he's getting those targets. At least he has the opportunity. He's a very nice flex play, I think, next week. A wide receiver 3, I would be a little bit hesitant to put him in there if you have that third wide receiver slot. There might be guys with better upside, but we'll see. He does have the target share going for him. So in a desperate spot, I think you could start him, and he has a little bit of upside because of that target share he's getting. He's got to catch a touchdown one of these times. He's had 32 targets the last 3 games that he's played, and he doesn't have any touchdowns. That could go up.
Yeah, for sure. And given his wingspan and his ability, to get contested catches, Drake London can definitely do his thing. And, the way I look at it is this, like, if I'm going to rank Michael Pittman as a wide receiver 3, I'm going to rank Drake London as a wide receiver 3 as well. They're getting similar type of, opportunity right now. And I think that, they're going to have similar type of stat lines, moving forward the rest of the way. So yeah, I think I'm cool with Drake London next week against Arizona. I think he'll be in my lineup at least as a flex play. We talked about tempering expectations on J.K. Dobbins, and this is why, 12 carries for him, 11 carries for Gus Edwards, and Gus Edwards happens to be the one to outperform him in this one. And we knew that this was going to be split down the middle, 50-50, and it's been that the entire time since Dobbins was back. It just so happens that Dobbins couldn't capitalize and be nearly as efficient as he was over the previous 2 games.
Right. Yeah, that's been the case, the whole season. I mean, obviously he was efficient the last couple of weeks, but we're not sure how long that could last. He had that low carry count, and that's kind of been, our quip with him. But Gus Edwards looked much more efficient yesterday. Neither of them scored, so it looks like both of them are going to have a relatively low upside. The Ravens offense just doesn't look good with Lamar Jackson in it. I'm looking at the game, like even just looking aside of the stats, like the record for Baltimore, I can't believe they're 10-5. Like, it's crazy. I think they've had some good matchups these past few weeks, or they didn't have to do a whole lot of scoring. Their defense is playing better as of late, but as long as Tyler Huntley or anybody else is a quarterback, it seems like this is pretty much a fantasy wasteland. I wouldn't trust J.K. Dobbins next week either. We saw this type of performance. We knew this was in the cards. He was overproducing a little bit the past few weeks. I'm not really excited to start either of these guys, especially with the way that we saw the carry split pretty much 50-50 right down the middle.
100%. They got Pittsburgh next week. The matchup isn't amazing. It's not terrible, but not something I'm really like looking forward to starting J.K. Dobbins in my lineup in championship weekend, unless you really need a running back. Listen, I have a hot take here, man. Mark Andrews, I think he's a bigger bust than Jonathan Taylor. I really
think so.
Mark Andrews was being drafted in the 2nd round, in all drafts, right?
Yeah.
Me personally, I was staying away from Mark Andrews this year. And honestly, one of the reasons why is because of his splits with Mark, with of all people, Tyler Huntley and Lamar Jackson, right? But even with Tyler Huntley this year, he's still not able to get it done, right?
And he's been on an extreme cold streak.
Dude, early on in the year, like, he's had some big games, right? He's had 1, 2, 3, 4 big games in the first 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
After that, you've been playing him, and you really haven't been getting that much. Now, at least Jonathan Taylor, he was able to kind of fill in for you, at least as a mid RB2, for the most part, I would say. And, I feel like he can kind of get by. Mark Andrews, he got it done for you early in the year, but now when it matters most, he's not coming through. He's not coming through at all. And it's tough because he's had 4 straight games under 10 PPR points. He sees Pittsburgh next week. Are you looking for another option for Mark Andrews if Lamar Jackson's back?
Yeah. Okay, hang on. If Lamar Jackson's back, I don't know. If Lamar Jackson comes back, I might roll the dice just one more time just to see what I can get. Because we know what Mark Andrews can be. And, you talk about if Mark Andrews is bigger bust than Jonathan Taylor. I don't know if that's the case. Jonathan Taylor, he was drafted pretty much at the 101. I think he was going 50-50 at least between him and Christian McCaffrey at the 101. Obviously, we knew Mark Andrews, he's a tight end. We know what he can be at tight end. He was a difference maker last year. He finished over Travis Kelce, I think, last year. So we thought that, this would be fantastic. Lamar Jackson comes back. He's going to be the only pass catcher outside of Rashad Bateman. Targets have to go somewhere, but that hasn't been the case this season. I think that Jonathan Taylor, the way he was drafted, and Mark Andrews, knowing he was a tight end, tight ends have much less positional value than running backs, I think, at this point. So I think it's hard to call him a bigger bust, overall than Jonathan Taylor. But definitely for tight ends, he should be scoring more points than he has been, especially by his own standard, like we saw the past few years. But these numbers that he's putting up, this is like typical low-end tight end 1 numbers. It's just not what we're used to seeing from Mark Andrews. I think that's why he might feel like a bigger bust than he might actually be. But if Lamar Jackson's back, I know it's going to be super tough to trust him in your lineup. There's nobody else really that I'm going to say, yeah, you have to start over him. We know what Mark Andrews can be. And the way that the tight ends have been playing this year, it's been so up and down. If you have Mark Andrews, I would just start him because at this point, I don't like a whole lot outside of him.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But, I'll give you a few tight ends I might be starting over Mark Andrews next week.
Well, yeah. Okay. So let's see. You want to go through them? Like Evan Ingram.
TJ Hockenson.
Yep.
TJ Hockenson. Yes. Evan Ingram. Yes. Dalton Schultz. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
I told Dalton Schultz I think I would.
I think
George Kittle.
Yeah, yes. I think it could be a game on the ground for the Cowboys against the Titans because it's supposed to be cold. But
but Tennessee's pretty good against the run, right? Yeah. So maybe not. Dallas Goedert. Yes, I would. That's about it. Pat Freiermuth. Maybe. Tyler Higbee after last night's game?
Well, Baker Mayfield's targeting him like crazy. So, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So,
that Rams game was weird.
We'll see.
It's crazy.
We'll see. We'll find out on Thursday when I put those rankings up, and you'll see Mark Andrews at number 2 behind Kelce. Watch. All right,
it's been the default. It's one more week for us. Let's not shake it up too much.
And then he ends up going off. Yeah. We talked about Devin Singletary and James Cook potentially having a bigger role this week against the Bears, and both basically ended up rushing for 100 yards each. I would not expect that against Cincinnati this upcoming week. I don't really want to start either, because the work is basically split down the middle, or Singletary might get a little bit of a lead there. If I do start one, it'll be Singletary. But not super excited to start either next week. They can obviously get in for a fluky touchdown here and there, but I wouldn't really depend on it. One note for next year, Singletary is set to be a free agent this offseason. So James Cook, he could be the guy next year, right? He's shown that he can be a legit early down back too. Despite his size, like he's obviously a little bit undersized, but he's been looking good. Obviously his forte has been in the pass game at Georgia, but now his yards after contact, his missed tackles force hasn't been too high in college, but he's been looking good in the run game in the NFL when he's when he's given his opportunities. So he could be some sort of like Tony Pollard light next year potentially. I don't expect him to get like 20 touches a game, but he could see 15 to 18 touches for the Bills offense and be perfectly fine next year. We'll see if Nyheim Hines is involved or not. I don't know what Nyheim Hines' contract situation is. I'll take a look at that in a second. But I think next year James Cook has a chance to really be a legit fantasy asset.
I think that's a good call. We talked about this, I think, a little bit earlier in the season about this when we were talking about these two running backs. Devin Singletary could be on his way out. James Cook could be a value next year. Just to, hit on the game quick, but, what we saw just this last week, both of these running backs averaged over 8 yards a carry on 12 and 11 carries. I'm not expecting that to happen again at all. That's, not really sustainable at this point.
James and it was Cook the Bears.
Yeah, it was the Bears. So that was a good matchup for them, but I'm not expecting that to happen, like I said, on a week-to-week basis. Although I'd love to see James Cook, next season get some more touches. And just about Nyheim Hines, talk about a confusing trade. Like, what did they trade for him to be their kick returner? Like, that's the only time I've seen him on the field besides that one touchdown he caught last week. It was just like one passing snap that he caught a touchdown, if that's what it was. It's just, I don't understand what the Bills traded for him, if this is why the Bills traded for him, if this is how they were going to use him. I figured he would get passing down snaps, and James Cook might not be as involved, but that hasn't been the case. So it's interesting to see how they've used him. I'm not really factoring him in any conversation right now next season, unless they come out and say that, yes, this is going to be our guy. Nyheim Hines is going to be the guy moving forward. If I'm Nyheim Hines, I'm confused why I was traded there too. It looked like they were planning to use him, and they just haven't. So, especially if you picked him up on the waiver wire, it's been pretty disappointing too, from fantasy perspective.
Nyheim Hines is they do have an out in his contract with 0 dead cap after this season. So we'll see if he's even on the team after this year. If they do decide to keep him, they're gonna be $5-6 million in the hole against the cap this year. So someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Dawson Knox has really been coming on lately. 3 straight games with a touchdown. Continue to play him as a tight end 1 next week. Like, whenever we see a streak of touchdowns for a tight end, they automatically become a tight end 1. That is now our process for taking our best shot at starting a tight end.
Right. Yeah. Like, we saw that with Jahan Dotson, and now it's happening with Dawson Knox. I think that's absolutely correct. This is kind of what you have to rely on. If he's on a hot streak, you just take him. Ride that hot hand until you can't, because there aren't that many hot hands in the league going around. Consistency has been nowhere for tight ends besides Travis Kelce. Everyone else has just been so fluky and all over the place. You can't trust them. So I think Dawson Knox, the way he's playing, definitely. Although I'm not sure in this game, Stephon Diggs only had 2 targets. He caught both of them for 26 yards. It was a rougher weather game. It's just interesting to see Dawson Knox outpace Stephon Diggs, in the passing game.
Stephon Diggs has been on a little bit of a cold streak since week 14.
A couple of receivers have, but
Jets, Miami, and Chicago. Yeah, I'm sure you're talking about Devontae Adams right now, but Stephon Diggs, Stephon Diggs over the last 3 weeks, single-digit fantasy points in PPR. Actually, no, Miami, he had 10.7.
Just over,
so, yeah, but still, man, like not great. This is a guy that you really trying to depend on. Not a great matchup against Cincinnati next week, but regardless, like you're still starting him. He could come through with a monster game and be the overall wide receiver 1, right? So you're never thinking about replacing him, but still a little bit disappointing. And if you were depending on him this week, it's very possible that you started him, and because of him, you weren't able to make it to the next round.
Yeah.
Speaking of Stephon Diggs, my opponent had him this week. So in our league, the only league that matters, and if all goes well tonight, Zach, I'll be punching my way to our fantasy championship.
That's gonna be pretty crazy. Let's see how this goes. Who do you have? So he has Gerald Everett tonight.
That's it. I'm up by 20, and I still have 2 players left. Keenan Allen and
oh my god, what are you sweating about? We're going to the fantasy championship, baby.
I'm not sweating. I'm not sweating at all.
Yeah. Don't be sweating that.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're going to the fantasy championship, baby. Let's go.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to see anything like that unless Justin Herbert exclusively targets Gerald Everett. We're not going to see anything like that.
It's funny. We kind of knew who we kind of knew going into yesterday who might be in the championship. Going up against me.
Yeah,
but Jalen Waddle came through and had a huge game, and the guy who was down, Rich, he was down in that matchup, and Jalen Waddle came through, and now he's up by like 0.2
yeah,
points or something like that.
Like, it looks like 0.14 points.
Yeah,
so
insane,
just
dude.
4.5 passing yards.
Insane.
That's the difference.
Insane.
It's crazy.
Insane. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, if he makes it through, it's me and my close buddies. We're gonna go up against each other. Yeah, and you know what's funny about him? That's his first time ever
playing
fantasy football.
Yeah, I think
everybody else in this league are veterans, I would say. fantasy football veterans. We have some fantasy football analysts we have like 4 or 5 fantasy football analysts in this league.
Yep.
We have, a couple close friends or whatever, and this is a guy I've been trying to get to play fantasy football for a while. Sometimes, you need that unique perspective, right? Where you're just like, we overanalyze a lot of times. And then he comes in like, oh, this guy's scoring points, I'm going to add him. Yeah. That's really what it comes down to. Right. And like literally that's how he's made it all the way.
It takes away the inhibition when it comes to waivers and stuff like that. You know, you're not worried about how it's going to go. You just pick up the guy on the hot streak. Sometimes that's how it works, and sometimes that's not how it works. So I think it's beginner's luck. We've seen this many times.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Like if you play March Madness too, like I played March Madness last year, and I got my sister of all people to play, and she won. So it's beginner's luck. You know what I'm saying? She probably picked them based on like the colors of the teams, and that's who she wants to win. I couldn't believe it. But
go ahead.
He
has a good team. So, I am worried next week. He has a really good team. So we'll see how that ends up going. If he beats me in the championship, man, I'm gonna be sick. I should never have invited him to this league.
Hey, well, you're in second place at least, so you'll be getting more than your money back in this league. Definitely. I'd be okay with that. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not okay with that. I'm looking for first place. It's first place or bust, baby. That's it, man. That's all I want. I want that trophy. We are going to get a perpetual trophy, by the way, that we'll be passing around in our league, so that should be fun. Justin Fields, he couldn't come through.
Yeah,
unfortunately, in this one, only 11 rushing yards on 7 carries. The Bills, it seemed like they came prepared. For this game, they didn't allow Fields to get anything going in the run game, and therefore he didn't come through. Like if he's not going to come through in the run game, like he's just not going to come through. Period. Especially given the fact that he has no wide receivers. But against Detroit next week, though, if you were able to overcome Justin Fields' performance, if you had some other guys go off, you got to fire Fields up against Detroit. He had 40 points against Detroit the first time he went up against them in 4-point pass touchdown scoring.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Don't worry about this performance, against the Bills in bad weather. I'm not worried about it. He still was efficient in the passing game. He had 119 yards and a touchdown, 15 and 23 completions. So it wasn't bad in the passing game. It's just a rushing supplement wasn't there. So yeah, definitely next week start him against Detroit. We saw what he did the first time, like you said, with those 40 points on the ground. He had that long rushing touchdown too. I'm not paying too much attention to this as far as a fantasy perspective with Justin Fields. It's his first dud since I think like week 5 or 6. He's been playing fantastic outside of that. It was bound to happen. And it was funny because I actually think I said last week on the podcast that he might be due for a quiet game. And it kind of happened this week. So I'm not worried about Justin Fields at all. I figured at some point it was going to happen. Definitely next week, just fire him up like you were last week. He's still going to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, if not maybe top 3, against Detroit next week for the fantasy championship.
And, his backfield mate, David Montgomery, he played about 66% of snaps with Khalil Herbert back. So he's still in the RB2 conversation next week against the Lions. And we'll get to Chuba Hubbard and those guys, soon. But the Lions were super stout, against the run. But the good thing is that, David Montgomery is involved in the pass game enough to where you can play him and he can give you a solid floor regardless. Even if Khalil Herbert gets a few more snaps than he did this week. In week 17.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Khalil Herbert really. At this
okay.
point,
Oh, you're not okay.
He might still come back. I don't think his touches are going to go up too much more to bite in Dave Montgomery's workload because it's pretty much Justin Fields, Dave Montgomery, and then maybe Khalil Herbert can jump in on this offense. But outside that, there's not really much I like. I mean, Cole Kmet had a quiet game too, so Justin Fields is out of options in the passing game. They're going to have to use the running backs. I think Dave Montgomery is their guy for next week.
One of our sleepers this week, Marquise Goodwin. Huge disappointment.
Yeah.
Big donut in your lineup.
That game was a disappointment.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it was cold.
It was a disappointment. Yeah, it was a disappointment. Yeah. The Seahawks wide receivers, had their shirts off before the game. That didn't age too well. No. But if you were desperate enough to start Marquise Goodwin, like I was in a couple leagues, I'm overcoming that donut in one league and I'm not overcoming it in another league. But he did get hurt in this game. He stayed out for a big chunk of the game, so that didn't help because of that wrist. But he definitely didn't help you move into the championship round. That's for sure. Now, if you were worried about Kenneth Walker, he ended up getting 26 carries after not even practicing all week. So just assume that he'll be good to go next week. regardless of his practice status. And he looked good. There was nothing in this game that I was like, oh, he doesn't look good or anything like that. He looks fine to me. So continue to fire him up. 26 carries, didn't score, but that's really what you want to see moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. 26 carries for 107 yards. It's over 4 yards a carry. Definitely. He didn't score a touchdown. That was disappointing. But the way the offense was playing just overall was not conducive to fantasy points. We saw DK Metcalf. He was able to get it done. But Kenneth Walker, I think he did really well. DJ Dallas obviously had that high receiving workload. He had 6 targets and he caught all 6 of them. So it's kind of buoying his production. I'm not worried about him cutting too far into Kenneth Walker's work because we know that Kenneth Walker, if they're running the ball, it's going to be Walker. So definitely Walker is the guy moving forward. And Marquise Goodwin, I'm with you. I thought this was going to be a good game for him. I thought that this was going to be a high scoring game, and it just didn't end up being that. The Chiefs are playing ahead the whole time, and you'd think that would be good for the receivers, but Geno Smith recently, he's kind of coming back down to earth. And it's like the Seahawks are faltering in their playoff hopes. I'm not sure if Geno Smith is going to be able to bring them back. It looked like they were missing Tyler Lockett in the passing game pretty much yesterday.
Yeah, they were. Kadarius Toney ended up scoring for the Chiefs. Only ran 9 routes though. So not like super startable next week, unless you need some deep options and, at a chance at a touchdown on a good offense. Most of his snaps were near the goal line in the red zone. So that's good. Like he will have a chance of scoring. He does have those packages. McCall Hardman can be back though. Just keep that in mind, but maybe he'll be limited in his first game back. I would say that Toney is a boom bust option in week 17. But nothing more than that. I wouldn't consider him reliable at all.
No, I wouldn't consider him reliable at all. And I think for that reason, I might leave him out of my lineup because he had a terrible snap share, terrible route participation. It's not anything that I want to rely on. The touchdown might make it look a little bit more, sustainable than, we'd like to think it is, but it's not. I'd rather start Juju, definitely. I think I could find other options too that I'd like. It doesn't seem like there's any reliable Chiefs pass catcher outside of Travis Kelce, even though Juju Smith-Schuster has been a little bit better as of late. Obviously, he put up a quiet game this game, but the Chiefs were playing from ahead the whole time, so they didn't have to throw the ball at all. Travis Kelce's the only guy that I'm happy starting in the passing game. But Patrick Mahomes, even with all the receivers having a quiet day, he still has a good fantasy day. So he seems like he's going to be good regardless. It doesn't matter. It's been the case all season. You think you see Patrick Mahomes who puts up 23 points in fantasy that you'd see more from the receivers. That wasn't the case.
It's going to be quite a decision with Juju next week going up against Denver. He had a decent matchup against them a couple weeks ago. That was their first, Kawhi Williams' first game back. He didn't play, a full complement of snaps. So, will he be able to do his thing will Juju be able to do his thing against them this upcoming week? We'll see. But it's going to be interesting. He'll probably be, still a wide receiver 2 for me. But you got to temper expectations just a little bit going into next week.
Yeah, I think we've been tempering expectations for Juju pretty much, the whole season since the first few weeks didn't go the way we wanted it to. He's had a couple good games, but like this kind of game, it's liable to happen any week, it seems like. And I thought this would be a much better matchup. My bold prediction last week was that he would have 2 touchdowns. It wasn't a shootout at all. So that kind of fell flat on its face. We'll see if we can get back on track next week, if I would make another bold prediction. But Juju Smith-Schuster, I'm not worried about him. It's just this kind of game can happen anytime.
Yeah. Jerick McKinnon, he only had 7 opportunities this week. That was pretty disappointing. Yeah. But again, like you said, the Chiefs were up all game long. At least he ended up scoring to save your day. But Mahomes, he only had 28 attempts, like you said. So, next week against Denver, they're probably going to be depending on the run again, right? That would be my guess. Like, Baker Mayfield was able to get it done though against Denver, so maybe Patrick Mahomes can as well. We'll see. If the Rams can beat up on them, I'm sure the Chiefs can too.
Yeah.
Both Alvin Kamara and Nick Chubb saw 20 plus carries. Taysom Hill had 9 carries and a touchdown. The receivers didn't do anything in that game. Pretty much what we expected out of that, Browns Saints game in that terrible weather. Amari Cooper actually had a decent game considering the weather, 6 for 72. It's not like you missed a whole lot if you didn't start Amari Cooper. It's not like he went off or anything like that, but he had a decent game. A lot better than I thought. But you know what? This was at home. This was at home for the Browns. So Amari Cooper had to do something. He had no choice. But
that's what it comes down to at this point.
But moving forward, still at the end of the day, it's like in a better weather game, in a normal game next week. By the way, week 17, a lot of good weather. Okay, just
That's
looking
a
ahead
good sign. Yeah.
at week 17. Week 16 was just absolutely terrible. But going next week, we should be fine for the most part.
Yeah.
The Browns have Washington next week. Not the best matchup for wide receivers. Um, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones still an option though. Amari Cooper, still tempering expectations on him the rest of
Yeah.
the way.
Definitely. And that's what we've been saying, this whole time since Deshaun Watson's come back. It hasn't been good news for Amari Cooper, but he did have 10 targets, like inexplicably in that weather. It's like, I didn't think anybody was going to get more than 5. And then Amari Cooper, the guy that we kind of been crapping on, these past few weeks, especially with Deshaun Watson at quarterback, comes out and gets double-digit targets. It's just hilarious. He didn't do a whole lot with him, like you said. He didn't miss a whole lot if he was on the bench. I expected a bigger game from Nick Chubb, and this has kind of been Nick Chubb's thing the past few weeks. He doesn't do a whole lot of scoring at all, but he gets those high yardage outputs. He's good for those single game props, that you're picking for underdog, getting that rushing yardage. But outside of that, he hasn't been doing much for fantasy teams, these past few weeks. So Kareem Hunt, same thing. The offense.
It's really that touchdown regression is getting to him. Like
Yeah.
he's scored in the first 8 weeks of the season. He scored 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. He scored 10 touchdowns in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
No, 11 touchdowns in 9 weeks. So, yeah. So now he has his first few games without scoring a touchdown. He's due next week, guys. He's due. He's scoring 2 touchdowns next week. Nick Chubb. It's calling it right now.
It's time for the fantasy championship breakout. Oh, that would be so funny. That would be something if you call that. But, like we said, that touchdown still hasn't been there. And we've just been seeing the high yardage output. And I think it has to do, just with the Browns offense taking a big step back with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. Obviously, they can't go back to Jacoby Brissett now. They're out of the playoffs. There's no reason to. But it's just been interesting with Nick Chubb. I thought that was good. And then Alvin Kamara, like you said, he put up a good performance. He did have that touchdown. And then Taysom Hill, he scored a touchdown. So I think that kind of justifies what we were calling for.
Oh, yeah.
I think that justifies us calling for a game from him. He did what he needed to do, and he didn't finish, as low as he could have. Especially in a bad game, Andy Dalton was just horrific in the weather. They did end up winning this game, but Taysom Hill, I think, was a good call this week.
Keep starting Nick Chubb, guys.
Yeah.
Still an RB1 play. Yeah. Keep starting him. He has the potential to score 150 and 2 any given week. So just start him no matter what.
I thought for sure it would be this week. I'll be honest.
No, you know what though? I'm not surprised he didn't score because I just feel like, I thought the volume was going to be there, but I didn't expect a lot of scoring in this game. Just be able to move the ball consistently, have some drives and stuff like that. I feel like that was the issue, and that really was the issue in this game. To be honest. Okay, let's see. Go to the Giants game. Each of Richie James, Isaiah Hodgins, and Darius Slayton all had at least 79 yards receiving in this game. And, what did we say before this game? That all these guys can potentially get it done.
Yeah.
Right? And who did we say we liked best this week in terms of matchup? Isaiah Hodgins, right? So if you ended up being desperate enough to throw him in, he was like one of our main sleepers last week. He got you 8 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. That's his 3rd touchdown in 4 games. And next week he gets Indy. He's another desperate flex next week, but I don't like him nearly as much as I liked him this week, obviously.
Right.
But let's see how the Chargers wide receivers do against Indy tonight. Kenny Moore is out tonight. Their nickel corner. The Colts nickel corner. So if he's out again next week, then Richie James might be the play out of the slot for the Giants if you can choose any Giants wide receiver.
Right. So Richie James is a play next week, where Isaiah Hodgins was last week. We got Isaiah Hodgins right last week. So maybe Richie James, you want to listen to us, maybe start him if you want a desperate flex. But you're right. I think this kind of borders on, I put it in the graphic here, it looks like we can start anyone against the Vikings and they'll be able to do what they need to do. Daniel Jones is at quarterback and he's making Isaiah Hodgins look like, a fantasy wide receiver 1. Man, I couldn't believe that. I thought for sure that there would be, some sort of vindication for the Vikings defense that they can stop somebody, but that wasn't the case. Richie James had a good game too. Darius Slayton, like you said, he had 79 yards on 4 catches. It wasn't a humongous day, but when 2 other receivers have more points than him, they're having a pretty good day. Saquon too had a good game this week. So it wasn't a bad game for the Giants offense. I'm not inspired to start Isaiah Hodgins again. Richie James, even, I know the matchup isn't bad next week, but we'll see how it goes. I don't like Daniel Jones, as you know, but he was able to come through too. He had a high passing volume as well in this game. And we figured that might be the case against Minnesota. So definitely, yeah, Isaiah Hodgins, he looked good this week. I'm not sure how much I trust him next week, but he might have pushed you to your championship because if you start him as desperate flex, you're probably expecting like 10 points out of him, maybe 14 points, and he puts up 22. You're well over projected on that total. At the end of the day.
You know who has the best matchup next week? If Kenny Moore ends up playing for the Colts next week, Isaiah Hodgins has the best matchup of all the wide receivers again next week against the Colts. Coming into this week, the Colts have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the left side over the previous 4 weeks, the 7th most over the last 8 weeks coming into this week. So Isaiah Hodgins might have another week. 3 touchdowns in 4 weeks, maybe 4 and 5. We'll see.
That would be something.
We'll see.
Really be something.
Isaiah Hodgins, fantasy football championship winner,
playoff MVP.
Unbelievable. TJ Hockenson, though, man, both him and Justin Jefferson saw 16 targets each. You kidding me, dude? Yeah. 13 for 109 and 2 touchdowns for Hockenson. This dude has like a serious weekly ceiling, right? Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this question, man. Like, is he somebody like Kirk Cousins is going to be in the Vikings next year, right? Signed that 2-year deal. He's going to be there. He's going to be their guy. Justin Jefferson, obviously there. Adam Thielen getting older, right? There's no one else there. Is TJ Hockenson somebody that you'll be aiming for in drafts next year?
Assuming that nobody, jumps in during the draft or the free agency, nobody comes in, a big pass catcher, a big name. I think so. You have to. Outside of, the top 5 that we usually talk about each year, is there anybody you want to take over him, for next season? And especially with this type of ceiling, obviously he's been a little hot and cold, but that's been the way his career has been. He has a low floor, but also a very high ceiling. I think he's definitely somebody worth targeting, next year. We're obviously going to talk a whole lot, over the offseason about that. But the way that this game looked, they traded for him, and this is how you use a player that you traded for. Take notes, Bills. I know you just picked up Nyheim Hines, and Nyheim Hines maybe isn't the talent or the guy that you wanted to get, like TJ Hockenson was for the Vikings. But this is how you use a guy that you traded for. With Justin Jefferson, I think that's why he's a bit volatile. Obviously with Justin Jefferson on the same offense, they both got 16 targets. That's not always going to be the case. But with this type of upside and a good offense on a good team, I'll take that tight end any day. This is what we wanted Irv Smith to be a couple of years ago. He couldn't stay healthy, and they finally turned to someone else. And TJ Hockenson, it looks like they have their guy for the rest of the foreseeable future, especially next season. As long as Kirk Cousins there, I think you're right on the money that this is a guy that we should be targeting next season.
Really, really disappointing game for Rhamondre Stevenson. He just didn't get enough touches. 91% of snaps, though. 15 touches, really not going to get it done, especially if he's not getting a ton in the receiving game. Only 2 catches for 3 yards. So, if you made it through to the championship round, like despite his performance this week, continue to start him, as a solid RB1 next week against Miami. 91% of snaps. That's going to continue even with Damian Harris back potentially next week. Just continue to roll with Rhamondre, even though, he might not have got it done for you, this week. Hopefully you were able to overcome that performance. But, he's been getting it done all week. This was like the one mulligan. It is what it is.
He's human after all. We've called him matchup proof a couple of times on this podcast, but it looks like this matchup was a little bit too much. It didn't help. Obviously had that 91% snap share. It didn't help that they were playing from behind pretty much the whole game, and they had to throw themselves back in the game. That would be why guys like Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers were able to get it done. Jacoby Myers on the good end of another crazy play at the end zone. I'm talking about. He caught that tip for the touchdown. It was pretty crazy, but with Rhamondre Stevenson, I think this was bound to happen. This type of game script is not going to be very favorable for him, and I was surprised to see this. I wish he could have gotten a little bit more work on the ground, but when you're throwing the whole, second half to get back into the game, this is what's going to happen. Hopefully you were able to get through it. We know what Rhamondre Stevenson is, as far as his fantasy value, and hopefully he can get back to that next week in a pretty good matchup against Miami.
Well, you would hope that if you're throwing the whole second half that he would get more than 3 targets. Right, you would hope that he's get what he was normally getting. He was getting 6-7 catches a game, right? So that's what you were kind of hoping for, But unfortunately, like that didn't happen. I think this is more of a fluky game than anything. So just continue to start him.
It's funny. It's funny because for throwing themselves back into the game, Mac Jones had 33 pass attempts to Joe Burrow's 52, who was playing with a lead. So that was a little bit interesting. That was just like something odd that I saw about this game.
Kind of makes sense though, because you don't really want to run the ball against the Patriots. Their vulnerability is really on the back end in the secondary. So this was smart game plan by Zach Taylor, to be honest with you. The only issue was that they couldn't really get anything going in the second half, right? That's when you kind of have to, like, just keep putting your, just keep it. I can't even talk right now. Just sometimes on a Monday you're trying to get things.
A Monday after Christmas? Come on.
Monday, yeah, dude.
Cut him some slack.
I did put some back yesterday. You know what I'm saying? I'm feeling okay this morning though.
Yeah.
No, but you know what? My point is this. You got to put your foot on the throat regardless. Like, even if you're up 20 points or whatever it was after the first half.
Yeah.
You gotta do what you were doing in the first half to keep it going.
Right.
Moving on to the Lions and Panthers. Both DJs got it done in this game. DJ Shark, we were back in this week. Right, he obviously had a really tough matchup against the Jets last week. We did not like him in that matchup for good reason, and we were back in this week. He gave us yet another 100-yard performance. So keep starting this man. Great matchup against Chicago next week. He's a wide receiver 3, man. He's a wide receiver 3 with upside. Basically, he's been averaging 100 yards receiving. Outside of the Jets game last week, like basically 300-yard games for DJ Shark. So he's doing his thing. Keep starting him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because he's been like one of the easier players to predict their performance. Yeah. It's funny because Minnesota, they had that good game. We know obviously you're starting everyone against Minnesota. Then they go to New York and you say, just lay off. Obviously he had that bad game and he comes back against Carolina. He has a good game. So I think that's pretty interesting that he's been that predictable. And against Chicago, do you trust him? What's your I think that has to be the case. I was just making sure that we're on the same page because he's pretty predictable. So he should go for 100 yards, guys. Now that we're saying that he should have a good game, he should be good for 100 yards next week. Obviously, I think with Justin Fields at quarterback, this could be a shootout between the Lions and the Bears, especially with the Lions like on their last leg for playoff hopes and the Bears trying to play spoiler in the division. We'll see how that game goes. It's a good storyline heading into that one. But DJ Chark, he's been super reliable, like you said, outside of that matchup against the Jets. So I like him, like you said, as a wide receiver 3. I think he has wide receiver 2 upside each week.
Yeah, he does. And the other DJ on the other side came through. We did like him this week as well. Recommended him. He was I think he was a mid wide receiver 2 for us. 5 for 83
wide receiver 20.
Yeah. 5 for 83 and a touchdown. Solid start against Tampa next week as well. So he's found his rhythm with Sam Darnold. 3 touchdowns over the last 3 games with Darnold, and all 3 of his starts he got a touchdown. No, actually no. He shit the bed like 2 weeks ago. So three out of the 4 against Seattle in tough matchup, but 3 out of the 4 games he's got it done. So just continue to start DJ Moore moving forward. But how about Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Foreman, dude? Combining for almost 300 rushing yards. After Detroit has been ridiculously good against the run game since their bye week, but not what anyone expected, man. These guys, might have been on your bench. Hopefully you had the guts or the desperation to start one of them, specifically Deontay Foreman, because he ended up scoring.
Yeah.
But now you look at Tampa next week. They're still a little tough to start, man.
Yeah. We can't expect this type of performance every week. And it seems like we're saying this a lot about a lot of players, but Deontay Foreman, he had the 21 carries. That's the one thing. He had 24 carries. Was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago when he had 72 yards? And this week he had 21 carries for 165 and a touchdown. I'm not trusting these guys on a consistent basis because, either one is liable to take over for the other. Chuba Hubbard, he did have 12 carries for 125 yards. That's ridiculous. Not expecting that to continue happening either. Neither of them got any receiving work because the run game was just going so well for them. I'm not, discounting Chuba Hubbard's receiving work value. I think this game script was just, it was working in their favor running the ball. So Chuba Hubbard didn't get those passes. I think he still has, a safer floor week to week because of that. But Deontay Foreman, as we've seen, has a higher upside because he has that rushing workload. And he is liable, like we said, to put up this type of 100-yard performance and a touchdown on the ground. So I like Chuba Hubbard if you want to play it safe. But Deontay Foreman, I think if you're on the upside, you play him. Raheem Blackshear, he did also have that touchdown. It could have been a bigger day for either one of these two guys too. But bottom line, it was a running game that was getting it done this week. I'm surprised DJ Moore had as good of a game as he did with this going on in the backfield.
Yeah, against Tampa, with the way Tampa has been playing, man, they just haven't been putting up points. So the game script might be fine for Deontay Foreman next week. So the fact that he got 20 plus carries in 3 of the last 4 games, you kind of have to just take a shot. Yeah, he had a bad game against Pittsburgh. They couldn't get anything going. on the ground game. But Tampa, over the last 4 weeks, they've allowed 400 rushing yards to running backs. So, 100 yards per game there. So, like, I feel like, Deontay Foreman might be fine next week. So I would consider him maybe a low end RB2 next week, just because of the fact that, he could potentially get another 20 plus carry game.
That's
and
true.
If anyone's getting 20 carries, you kind of have to,
put them on your radar.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of have to, potentially just throw them in your lineup, if that's going to be the case. Obviously, the Pittsburgh game really put a bad taste in our mouth, going into this past week.
Would you like putting Deontay Foreman in at your flex?
Yeah, I think so. So.
How about Chuba Hubbard?
I didn't like them this week against the Lions because the Lions have been absolutely stout against the run game lately. You should see the names that they have been like stifling, right? Going into this week. Unbelievable. They did all that in the first half, dude. They each had 100 yards in the first half, which is insane.
Chuba Hubbard had like 70 yards in the first 5 or 6 minutes. I thought he was going to be the guy.
2 big runs.
Yeah.
I know, man. What was your question? I'm sorry. I missed it.
No, I was just asking, if Chuba Hubbard would be someone you would put in your flex too. Would you think either of these guys could be in your flex? Or do you think Deontay Foreman really only has consideration for that?
I think, I agree with you. I think Chuba has a little bit of a higher floor in PPR because he might get a couple more receptions. But I think I'd rather throw Deontay Foreman into my flex, than Chuba Hubbard if I had the choice between the two, just because of that upside of 20 plus carries.
Right.
Yeah. Shane Zylstra, who you should not pick up on the waiver wire. Yeah. He had 3 touchdowns for the Lions in this game. So sorry, Amon-Ra. Sorry, DJ Shark. You guys couldn't get any of those touchdowns because Shane Zylstra was hogging them all. I would not expect this to continue because there were 3 tight ends running routes in this one. So he just happened to be the guy this week. So don't chase these points. Leave Shane Zylstra on the waiver wire. Let someone else pick him up. If someone else is picking him up in the championship week, consider yourself lucky.
If somebody started Shane Zylstra, this week,
please DM me that, and I'll send you $500 right now. Right. I'll Venmo you $500 if someone in your league starts Shane Zylstra.
That would be just crazy. Like, if someone starts Shane Zylstra, they better, like, I don't know, can they tell the future? Like, what would they do? You can't play the lottery, but man, they should go do some sports betting or something. You know what I'm saying? That would be crazy.
DeAndre Swift didn't come through. But he did play on 56% of snaps. That led the Lions this week. I'm playing both him and Jamal Williams next week against the Bears. If I'm in my championship, the Bears, they've been giving up a ton of fantasy points to running backs. We just saw what James Cook and Devin Singletary did on limited work. Hopefully it didn't cause you to lose this week. Neither Jamal Williams or DeAndre Swift, because neither of them really came through. But next week against the Bears, I'll be back in.
I can't believe we're still holding on to hope with these guys, DeAndre Swift especially. It's like, well, he had 4 carries and a couple looks in the receiving game. Let's just hope that he can get back to it. It's just terrible. DeAndre Swift, I think he might be a candidate for one of the biggest letdowns. Obviously, he was injured, but this whole season, it's just been rough with DeAndre Swift, and we're giving him all these mulligans. Hopefully, he can get something done next week in a better matchup against the Bears. But I mean, this was just horrific. Obviously, the game script didn't really favor him. We do know him as the receiving back, but it was just Jared Goff to Shane Zylstra yesterday. So I think that DeAndre Swift, it's a complete shot in the dark upside, play if you want DeAndre Swift in your lineup next week. Because at this point, he's not getting anywhere near the workload that we need to be able to trust him. And I don't even know what the outlook is for next season. And we'll talk about that. We got plenty of time this offseason to discuss that. But Jamal Williams, too. He had a terrible day. 7 carries for 11 yards. It's a terrible average. No touchdowns. He isn't a touchdown machine anymore. And Justin Jackson, that guy that was taking carries for them, had -1 yards. So it's just terrible. It's bad days in the Detroit backfield right now.
It really is. But against Chicago, I'm taking my shot. Taking my shot.
You're a little bit more confident than I am. Yeah.
Confident? I don't know if confidence is the word, but I'm taking my shot.
I'm taking my shot. Yeah, I'm like sitting there, like I'm not sure I'm taking my shot. I might go try and find somebody else, but who knows? There's probably nobody else on the waiver wire at this point.
I'm probably going to have both of these guys ranked as low end RB2s next week,
right,
against the Bears.
So we have Deontay Foreman. That's going to be a low end RB2.
They're all going to be ranked in the same spot. Williams. All of them are going to be sharing that 24.
Who of those three?
Spot.
Who of those 3 are you starting?
Foreman.
Okay, so it's pretty easy for you.
I would say so. Foreman, yeah. I would say so. Okay. George Kittle, he's winning people championships. 6 for 120 and 2 touchdowns this week. This was a tough matchup. He still came through. 4 for 93 and 2 touchdowns the week before. You're firing his ass up against Vegas next week. Let's hope it continues if you have him. He just punched you a ticket to the championship. Purdy was locked into Kittle in this one, man. 36% target share. So
Purdy's been locked into him since he came in. You know?
Yeah.
I love
it. With Debo out, Kittle has historically gotten a way more production with Debo Samuel out of the lineup. So, continue to fire him up, man. A lot going in his favor moving forward.
Yeah, George Kittle, the biggest beneficiary of Brock Purdy coming in, has been George Kittle. Trey Lance, we didn't get to see much of him, but he didn't really dial into George Kittle a whole lot because he was out. Let's see. Then we have Jimmy Garoppolo, and we saw him. He had a couple good games, a stretch from week 6 to 8. Obviously he had a couple good games, but then he quieted down. And then Brock Purdy comes in, and he's showing like that playmaking ability that we saw back in 2019, and he's getting that target share that we need. He's looking like a top tight end right now. Do we rank him over Mark Andrews next week? I mean, the way that he's being targeted by Brock Purdy, I think that
it's Kelsey and Kittle in the top two.
Yeah, he has a case to be the tight end too. I actually kind of forgot about him when we talked about Mark Andrews earlier. George Kittle, he's having a really good end of the season here. He might be winning championships. He might also be winning consolation brackets because he's kind of been a bit of a letdown as well this season.
Right.
Not as bad as Mark Andrews, but definitely, in that range where, he hasn't been what we wanted him to be or what we know he can be. We've seen that the past 2 weeks. And I'm looking at this now. Was he actually the tight end 3 on the week with 30 points? Like,
hey man, you can't discount Shane Zylstra, okay?
Well, Shane Zylstra, I think, had 25 PPR points.
Oh, really?
George Kittle had 30. I know TJ Hockenson had 35. Who are we missing? Who had a bigger tight end day?
Let's see. So TJ Hockenson, Tyler Higbee. And
that's
George
right.
Kittle.
Okay,
so,
yep.
So Higbee had 0.4 more fantasy points than George Kittle.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because of all the receptions.
Suddenly, tight ends are plenty in week 16.
Jahan Dotson, though, man. 6 for 76 and a touchdown on 9 targets. I was recommending Dotson big time this week if you listen to last week's shows, and he came through. If you were desperate enough to start him, he came through. A couple of our desperate wide receiver plays actually end up coming through.
Yeah.
Between
Hodgins and Dotson,
yeah. And the Commanders did make a quarterback change, by the way, in the second half. They brought in Carson Wentz in to replace Taylor Heineke after a pick 6. It's very possible we see Wentz get the start next week against Cleveland. And if that happens, we've seen these wide receivers, kind of take a step forward overall. Carson Wentz did hurt McLaurin, but he helped Curtis Samuel and he helped Jahan Dotson too.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing for me, seeing Carson Wentz come in. Obviously, I think it was Heineke that threw a touchdown to Dotson.
Yeah, it was.
Right?
It was.
So that was before, obviously, Carson Wentz came in. But Dotson, he's looking healthy, like you said. He's had very similar stat lines these past few weeks. He scored a touchdown in each of those games. He's a touchdown machine at this point, He looks like he's going to be really good. And I'm interested not only just for the rest of this season, obviously Carson Wentz coming in. That doesn't really change my opinion on Jahan Dotson at this point. I think any quarterback's going to be able to do what they need to do. Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz are both, serviceable quarterbacks. So I'm not worried about Jahan Dotson this season. But I wonder how we'll be ranking Jahan Dotson next season if they can get an actual quarterback. You know what I'm saying, in Washington?
I think he's going to be undervalued regardless.
You think so?
Yeah.
That'll be one of the storylines maybe this offseason.
Because McLaurin is still going to be there, right? Yeah. And I think, obviously McLaurin's going to be drafted over him, but I think Dotson's going to be a serious value. I really do.
I think he could be. And he was one of those guys that I called, I said that he'd be a really solid receiver. I'm not sure if he has like playmaking ability, like, like guys like Devontae Adams. Obviously that's a high bar, but he's going to be super dependable. And those guys tend to get it done. Like kind of Doug Baldwin-esque, you know what I'm saying? If you remember those days, I could see him kind of filling that type of role. So you're right. I think he could be undervalued going into next season. But it's going to be tough to overlook that all these games that he started, he's scored a lot of touchdowns. That might help him a little bit in terms of his value, bringing that up, because the offense hasn't been bad. As bad as the quarterback situation is, that's what I'm saying. If they can get a good quarterback, I know there have been rumors, like there's a bunch of quarterbacks hitting the free agent market. Lamar Jackson, most notably, maybe if they don't get anything done in Baltimore. But I wonder if he'd go to Washington.
Do you know who Matt Harmon, who, does
Yeah,
the
perception.
Do you know who his comp was for Jahan Dotson?
Was it Doug Baldwin?
Doug Baldwin. Nice job, Zach.
Okay, I swear
Nice
I didn't
job.
even look at that.
I know you
But
didn't.
it's
I know you
just
didn't.
something that, you know,
Great job.
it
Great
just
job.
reminds me of that type of role that he might play.
There you go. There you go. And that's literally that was his comp. Nice job. Nailed it. High scoring game, man, between the Cowboys and the Eagles. Your Cowboys got it done when it was all said and done. But Gardner Minshew came through for fantasy, not only for himself, but for Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. Devontae Smith has been balling lately. 4 touchdowns over the last 4 games. He took advantage of a banged up Cowboys secondary, caught 2 touchdowns in this one. And Dallas Goedert, by the way, he came back to a full-time role, so roll him out next week as you normally would, regardless of whether, who the quarterback is, whether it's Minshew or Hurts. But Minshew came through, man.
Yeah. No, I wasn't surprised, especially with Devontae Smith. I said about it last week, the Cowboys secondary is banged up outside Trayvon Diggs. Trayvon Diggs had a bad game 2 days ago too. So it was just a good game overall for the pass catchers. But I said that a guy like Devontae Smith would be able to pop off. He had 2 touchdowns. So I'm feeling pretty good about that one. I saw that one coming from a little bit of a mile away. Dallas Goedert, he had 3 catches. That was it. But he had 67 yards. There were big catches every time he's getting the ball. Towards the end of the game, the Eagles offense couldn't get anything done. Also, they turned the ball over 4 times. So obviously that's going to hurt Dallas Goedert's production. I think if they bring those down a little bit, which they can definitely against the Saints next week, we can see Dallas Goedert have a big game. So I like him as top 5. He's jumping right back into that conversation now. He's back from injury. And Gardner Minshew, talk about a good streamer. I'm not
Very
sure. I think that in terms of fantasy production, Jalen Hurts would have had a better game. But in terms of total offensive points and, giving other guys opportunities to get the ball and score points, like it's pretty much a 1-for-1 fill-in. Like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, we've seen them go back and forth with being the leading target guys and scoring touchdowns. It didn't feel like Jalen Hurts was missing. If you show me the box score and didn't show me who was playing, be like, okay, yeah, Jalen Hurts played. Because Gardner Minshew had a really good game.
He really did. I talked about CeeDee Lamb having a big game this week because of the specifics of this matchup, and he came through big time. 10 catches for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So we got the studs coming through.
Yeah.
But Davante Adams, though, not the best time for a 3-game slump from Davante Adams. 2 catches for 15 yards on 9 targets. Really
disgusting.
Derek Carr
makes you shake your head.
3 interceptions for him. Josh Jacobs, 15 for 44. Josh Jacobs, extremely disappointed after the game. He's done, dude. Josh Jacobs is done. He was talking so much shit after the game. He's like, I'm done. I'm tired. I get it, man.
It's been one of those kinds of seasons.
What a nightmare for the Raiders offense, man, just this entire year. But you did call Josh Jacobs a bad game from Josh Jacobs this week. You did call that. So nice job on that one.
Thank you. I've been wrong many times, but I just thought that it would be a tough game against Pittsburgh, especially with the weather. And I thought this was going to be a Davante Adams game. I was like, he has to get right?
Me too.
Like it has to be a time where he turns it around. But Derek Carr was terrible. 2 of 9 receptions. That's just it makes you sick to your stomach. Especially the way that he's been playing. He had that 5-game stretch a couple weeks ago where he was just unstoppable. And now they just stopped getting the ball to him. Obviously, he's had those targets, but not very high quality. Davante Adams hasn't been able to capitalize on that target share. And we've kind of seen this season where he has a good game and then he's quiet. It's been a little bit of a storyline in terms of fantasy football. Obviously he's been super consistent outside of a couple of games, but those couple of games, he just doesn't do well. He puts up less than 10 points, and you can't have that in your lineup, especially now. He got you to your fantasy playoffs, but he might be losing you out of them at this point.
It really sucks. It really sucks. Keep starting him. Obviously, if you were lucky enough to make it through to the championship round, despite that performance by him or Josh Jacobs, keep starting these 2 guys next week. But unfortunately, very, very bad performance. Hopefully that didn't knock you out of the playoffs. On the other side of the ball, Pat Fryermuth's route participation jumped way back up to 90%. Maybe he was banged up, maybe because of that injury that he had. He wasn't playing as much, but something that we wish we would have known going into this game, right? But if you made it through to the championship round, with him, he's back up to a solid tight end that you can trust as long as he continues to run routes at this rate.
Yeah, and look at how just fluctuating, our trust is with tight ends at this point. All you have to do is have one good
every week.
And that's all it comes down to. And then obviously you look at the route participation stuff too, the snap share, to see where they're going in that department. But definitely with Pat Freiermuth, we see all that go up this week, and that's all you need to see. Kenny Pickett, he didn't look bad. He didn't look as bad as he has. Obviously, they only had 3 points up until like the fourth quarter, but it looks like he's going to be serviceable enough for Pat Freiermuth at least. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson have respectable days, and Najee Harris was able to get it done too. Obviously, you're not excited to start. You're not going to be starting Kenny Pickett in any lineup, but it should be enough to make Pat Freiermuth relevant. And that's really the only guy I trust at this point, even outside of George Pickens and Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I agree. Aaron Jones, another guy who could not come through. He only played 38% of snaps in this game. Apparently, he had an ankle injury early in the game that limited him the rest of the way. So definitely disappointing. We didn't really hear about that ankle injury during the game. But if you had him going, you were wondering where the hell he was. But keep an eye on that ankle injury going into next week. Regardless, it seems like A.J. Dillon's going to have a bigger role in Week 17.
Yeah, and that's kind of going to be the case with any running back situation. But if Aaron Jones is just a little bit banged up, we've seen these guys kind of splitting carries, not really splitting them 50-50, but, there's been a bit of a timeshare in the backfield. A.J. Dillon, I do like him more next week because Aaron Jones might be out. Quiet game from Aaron Jones. It's tough if you started him, but I think next week we should have clarity going into the matchup. A.J. Dillon, like you said, might be the better play. It was a quiet day for the Packers offense, even though they did score 26 points. It was mainly because the Packers defense was doing well against Tua, who had 3 bad interceptions at the end of the game. Yesterday.
What happened to Tua, man? He threw for 300 yards, but a big chunk of that because of Jalen Waddle's 84-yard catch and run touchdown. But that was the one touchdown that Tua threw, right? And then he had 3 interceptions, man. I think this has to be said here, man. He's been overrated for fantasy this year. He's had 4 good games this year. That's it. Out of 12 full games played, he's had 4 good fantasy games. And, good for me is defined by like 20 points in a 4-point passing touchdown scoring setting, right? Kirk Cousins had 7. Jared Goff had 5 of those. Trevor Lawrence had 6 of those. Geno Smith had 9 of those. Tua wasn't a good fantasy quarterback this year, dude.
Okay. Hang on. I think he was all right. I think he was good. I don't think he was great.
I think the perception. I think the perception of Tua as a good fantasy quarterback was high.
Yeah.
And it was much higher than his actual performances.
He didn't meet expectations at all, especially with the weapons that he has. You think he'd have more. I don't know if you saw, and this might just be Dolphins fans coming up with excuses for Tua, but did you see the one play? And I know NFL Memes, if you follow that page, posted this. They showed this one clip of Tua going down pretty hard on his head. And they said that might be a concussion there. And he might have been playing with some sort of head injury. Obviously, it's a Dolphins fan saying it, so I'm not sure. But those interceptions looked a little bit uncharacteristic. To go from balling in the first half to just terrible in the second half. It was interesting to me because it kind of seems like it makes sense to me. Maybe it's just because I'm not, I didn't see a whole lot of the game, but the one play where he went down, his head went down. He got like that whiplash, what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where his head hit the ground hard. I don't know if that would be contributing to it, but it was like he turned on a dime, obviously the way he was playing. So I don't want to just make excuses for him, but that might be part of it. I'm not sure.
I don't know, man. Maybe. And
regardless,
first half,
he was
playing okay. Like, I don't know. Like, he had that really good throw to Tyreek, right? Deep, which was great. That set them up, obviously. And then that Jalen Waddle play, that was all Jalen Waddle right there. Right? Running up 80 yards for that touchdown, 85 yards, whatever it was.
Did you notice Tyreek Hill was escorting him? I was like, whoa, how does he have a blocker that far downfield? I'm like, oh, wait, it's Tyreek Hill.
That was great. That was great. But yeah, man, like we've been ranking Tua, I've been moving him up in rankings here and there every single week. But he's just a low end QB1 for me, man. Like I'm not, and it's been the weapons that have been elevating him, when he's had those big games. He had that 40-point game early on in the season. And I think because of that, we were like, oh, like look what he's capable of. But no, he just hasn't got it done this year, man. Straight up. He's I don't know. Actually, you know what? Let's look at it. Let's look at the points this year in terms of like where he's ranked among quarterbacks this season. I'm looking at averages here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He's a quarterback 12 in fantasy points per game this year. So
yeah, that's interesting. Here's another thing, a little note. he's finished those games, those 4 games that he said he had a good game. He finished as a QB4 or better. Outside of that, he's not a QB1 any other week. He's not even a QB1. So that's pretty bad.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is what it is. I think he's a good quarterback. And he was able to get it done for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, which is awesome. But one could question Jalen Waddle. Maybe he could have had a better year with a better quarterback.
Maybe
as he's had, because if you look at his reception totals this year, hasn't been that high. He hasn't been targeted as much as Tyreek Hill.
Right.
Obviously, rightfully so, I guess. But he could have been used a little bit more. Even though his production, I think he overproduced on his opportunity this year, Jalen Waddle, because he's a great talent. He's amazing. He's such a good wide receiver. Yeah, one could argue.
I mean, he's not the type of guy that's going to need all those targets. We know he's a big play threat, but still,
exactly. But imagine the type of year he could have. If he had.
And we talked about him, I think, in the offseason. At least when Tyreek Hill was traded to Miami, I was like, that Jalen Waddle breakout's going to have to wait. And it looked like we were maybe headed for a breakout, but then, he's kind of cooled down. Tua, especially these past couple of weeks. Are the Dolphins even going to make the playoffs? We're going to have to see. They have to win at least their next 2, the final 2.
Jalen Waddle, you got to start him. He's a low-end wide receiver 1, pretty much borderline wide receiver 1, just because he's a baller player, right? Yeah. But over the last 5 weeks, 5 catches, 1 catch, 2 catches, 3 catches, 5 catches, right? But he scored last 2 weeks, so he's got it done for you because he's a baller.
Right.
When you look at his yards per catch, dude, like 16 yards per catch last week, 24 yards per catch this week, like
just crazy.
Anyway, moving forward, we're trying to let's finish up this podcast. Christian Watson, he was having a great game up until halftime. 8 targets, 6 catches for 49 yards. He could have had a couple touchdowns if Aaron Rodgers hit him properly on either of them. The one near the goal line, the one he had to turn around for, that wasn't Christian Watson's fault. If Rodgers hit him on the outside shoulder, he probably would have scored. Yeah. And then he had that other long pass where he beat his defender. Aaron Rodgers overthrew him.
That was on 4th down. That was disappointing.
That was on 4th down. That was disappointing for sure. So he didn't hit him either. Now, he didn't play a snap in the second half because of a hip injury. So no word on the severity of that just yet. Hopefully he'll be fine because the Packers get the Vikings next week.
Yeah.
And if you can't play Christian Watson, or maybe I should say, if I can't play Christian Watson against the Vikings in the championship round, I will be heartbroken, dude. I will be heartbroken.
It's the grudge match for that missed first catch of the season. Remember, that was back in week 1.
Oh, was that against the Vikings?
That was against the Vikings in week 1.
I didn't realize that.
So they put them end to end, Minnesota start and Minnesota end. Oh my God, this would be a fantastic matchup for Christian Watson. You got to be like, just chomping at the bit. We got to hope that he plays.
I'm hoping that he plays, dude. Hopefully he's just like a hit pointer and he'll be able to go, man.
If Watson doesn't play, do you think Romeo Doubs gets a bump just because we're playing Minnesota?
Yeah,
I feel like you have
for sure. And so does Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard ended up leading them in targets in this game. Don't forget about Allen Lazard, Zach. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
you wanted to write him off.
It was funny because last week I said I'd be surprised if Allen Lazard leads them in targets this game. You're like, I wouldn't be. So I was surprised. Let's just put it that way. I was surprised. I couldn't believe it.
But I think you're right, though. If Watson misses next week, like both guys are in play against the Vikings.
Yeah,
for sure.
If Isaiah Hodgins, Richie James, and them are in play against the Vikings and they're doing what they did last week, Aaron Rodgers is going to have a much better day. And these receivers are probably going to go off.
Exactly. All right, let's race through a couple of these. I don't want the podcast to be too long here, so let's race through a few of these. There's always so much to talk about, on these Mondays, dude.
On Mondays. Yeah.
All right, so Dolphins backfield, it was back to a 50-50 split. Jeff Wilson had the edge by a couple of routes run, had another carry, also had a goal line look, the goal line look, but 50-50 split down the middle for the most part. I'm not sure if I want to start either of them against New England next week. I might avoid the situation. Are you avoiding, or are you okay starting one or the other?
I've kind of been avoiding this backfield. Okay. And like I said, I don't like Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert a ton either way. So I just kind of take my hands off of that. I didn't draft any of them. I wouldn't advise playing over anyone over. I wouldn't advise playing them over really anybody. Obviously, you have to look at the matchup, but I'm not chomping at the bit to put them in my line.
Yeah, the matchup's not that great either. Anyway, Cam Akers, he's out here punching people's tickets to the championship round. If you started him. 23 carries for 118 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was the clear back in that backfield, and the Broncos had no answer for him and Baker Mayfield. And now you look at it, the Chargers are on deck next week, and now Cam Akers is going to bring you home a championship trophy. So who would have thought that Cam Akers and James Conner, who I'll get to in a second, is going to bring home people championships? How awesome is that?
The dynamic duo of Cam Akers and James Conner, and even Tyler Higbee in this game. Like, if you would have told me going into the season, obviously there's no way of having known, but the schedule makers looked at this like Russell Wilson and the Broncos playing the Rams, defending Super Bowl champs, so Christmas Day is going to be great. If you would have told me that the 4-11 Broncos would lose to Baker Mayfield and Cam Akers, and the Rams are 5-10, like, oh my God, it would have been crazy. Like, I wouldn't have believed you. No way.
Tyler Higbee, 9 for 94 and 2 touchdowns. It seemed like Baker is looking at him heavy, right? Yeah. 39% target share for him in this game, 25% target share last week. He's like a top 6 tight end play probably next week. Just fire him up. The Bucks Cardinals game, absolute worst, dude. But let's talk about the fantasy contributors real quick. Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White, they were rotating drives. But the drives Fournette were in on for, like, those are the drives that were actually sustained. So that's why the touch disparity is so high between him and White. But also when Fournette was on the field, they just wanted to give him the ball more. So they actually called more run plays for him when he was on the field. So at the end of the day, Fournette had 29 touches, 20 carries for him, 9 catches for 90 yards. It was a huge game for him. White only had 11 touches, but ended up scoring in the fourth quarter through the air. Didn't like White so much. I was much more interested in playing Fournette in this game, and that's going to continue going into next week. I would much rather play Fournette than White, obviously, after this game.
We saw that. And it looks like Leonard Fournette's locked in for some receiving work now that I thought Rachaad White would be getting. White obviously scored the touchdown, but it looks like Leonard Fournette's going to be the play. It's been like the same story as far as targets go and target distribution, and the players have been getting it done this whole season for the Buccaneers. Like Mike Evans, is he an afterthought? Like, he's got 8 targets. He's just not catching them, man. He's a big bust too. Like, there's been a bunch of players where it's just been like, what happened?
The wide receiver 33 since week 5, and the wide receiver 46 since his week 11 bye. He's been unstartable, right? Like, as anything more than a flex play, maybe, and he ain't helping you. That's for sure, right? But, and Tom Brady, man, like, what's up with him? If he can't get it done against Arizona, there's something up. He's now thrown 7 interceptions in his last 4 games.
Yeah, I would complain, but my quarterback has thrown a lot of picks too. You know what I'm saying, Dak Prescott. But
at least, but Prescott is making plays though.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? He can make plays.
Too. Yeah,
I mean, that play to T.Y. Hilton, that was a big play right there.
Oh my God,
on the left sideline,
only catch. That
I was like,
hilarious.
who is that? Who caught that? Like,
I thought that was like, if you remember, I don't know if you remember. This might be a little bit deep into the Cowboys lore. If you remember Dwayne Harris.
I remember
the dreadlocks coming out of the back.
Oh yeah,
and kind of like the speed,
shades of Dwayne Harris.
I just had flashbacks when the ball was going. I couldn't believe it, but yeah,
that was one of the prettiest throws that I've seen this year. Honestly, that was such a nice.
It traveled. I think the next gen stat was like 62 yards in the air.
Really, like, and you know what? The ball placement was just like absolutely insanely perfect on that one.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly,
that was an absolute bailout because it was 3rd and 30. Like, that's inexcusable, especially in that game situation.
Were they down?
There was 6 or 7 minutes left in the game. That's 3rd and 30 after 2 sacks. One of them was a strip sack that they just barely managed to recover. Like, that's inexcusable. They just got bailed out. That was horrific. Right. But yeah, the thing about Mike Evans, getting back just real quick before we end this, Mike Evans, he's had 9 targets, at least 8 targets for the last 5 weeks. He just isn't catching the ball. And maybe that goes on Tom Brady. Like, we know he's not playing as well, but when you get that many targets and you produce 4 out of 5 weeks under double-digit scoring, like, that's just PPR scoring at that. It's just not startable. You're right. And I think that's this is like one of the biggest busts of the season that we're looking at in Mike Evans.
Another disappointing stat line from DeAndre Hopkins, man. 1 catch for 4 yards.
Ew.
Brutal. Marquise Brown, 3 catches for 57 yards. Greg Dortch, 10 catches for 98 yards on 11 targets from Trace McSorley. So Dortch making a comeback. He moved back into the slot. We never have any idea like where these wide receivers are going to be lining up, dude. Who's playing? We have no idea, dude. Dortch was hardly playing. Hollywood was a slot guy. And now this week, Dortch magically reappears and is their slot guy once again. So what will it be next week against the Falcons? Who knows? Yeah. If you want to pray and like take a shot on Dortch playing the slot next week, sure, go ahead.
I think you can. And the thing is, we've seen this happen before. We saw this Cooper Rush earlier in the season where CeeDee Lamb was getting targets but not producing, but Noah Brown, one of those guys that he practiced with all the time, was getting a bunch of targets. Same thing here. Probably Greg Dortch probably works with Trace McSorley a lot, so obviously McSorley is going to be looking for him. He has a bit of a connection. DeAndre Hopkins had 10 targets coming from that backup quarterback, like we said. I wasn't expecting a whole lot this week. I know you had him on the over, or the higher, I should say, with your picks this week on Underdog.
Well, I had him over on the receptions. I thought he was going to get 5 catches for like 47 yards.
I thought he was good for that too. I thought
because he's known for that.
Yeah,
he's known for doing his thing with any quarterback. But Trace McSorley proved to be too bad.
I thought a relatively quiet performance was in the cards, but not this. Like this is it was just terrible. Greg Dortch was running the ball too. I didn't get it. It was like the Greg Dortch game against the Buccaneers. I couldn't believe it.
Weird, dude. James Conner though, 15 carries for 79 yards and a touchdown, 7 catches for 41 yards. Since he's fully come back from his injury in week 10, he has been the overall RB4, only behind Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, and Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah,
this is why I was so high on James Conner before the season started. He's finally given me retribution. He didn't happen. He just didn't happen to do it until it mattered the most. So thank you, James Conner, for proving that I wasn't a crazy person for ranking you so high before the season started.
Yeah. No, I didn't think you're crazy either, because we talked about this a lot in the offseason. And as we were heading into like this season, talk about rankings and stuff, we've kind of drafted him to have the workload that he has now. He just wasn't getting that earlier in the season. Who knows why? Like, I know, Benjamin was around, but there's no reason to have him playing like that. He was banged up too. It was just really confusing earlier in the season, but he's come back on this season. Do you think he's moving back into that territory heading into next season? Where he might be like a value if he goes in the 3rd round?
It's tricky, man. It's tricky. It's tricky. We'll have a lot of time to talk about that, but it's tricky. I'm not convinced,
there could be a lot of turnover situation for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see that. Yeah.
There's
Cliff Kingsbury probably gone.
There's a Cliff Kingsbury rumor going around that he might resign. He might not even be fired.
He
might
better
just outright resign.
He better resign before he gets fired.
Yeah.
You can't fire me if I quit.
Yeah.
All right, guys. That's going to do it for this episode. We still have one more game to decide our fate between the Chargers and the Colts tonight. Good luck. The Chargers will clinch a playoff spot if they win this game. So, they should have some extra pep in their step tonight. Hopefully, Justin Herbert can hopefully get it done.
Yep.
Good luck. Hope to see you guys in championship week in week 17. Have a good one. Take it easy. Bye-bye.